You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, your most authoritative news analysis show. I share with you a few of the messages that are still coming in. We'll move on to discuss education and the call to the Supreme Court to declare that free SHS should not happen now. This one from Elvis, he says that, Samson, can the Ministry of Trade tell the whole world the benefits that have accrued to Ghana since the country initialed the interim agreement in 2007? This is critical for the debate. And Larry says, Samson, ECOWAS has never gotten anything right. We might want to start off by opening up the borders between member countries for easy movement of citizens, goods and services. We must go to the EPA as a united front. Then we have a bargaining power. But the present situation, EU is only blackmailing us. I read a very final one from an anonymous sender. He says that we should not only pay attention to the NGOs like Third World Network. They are articulate and vocal and are often driven by so-called anti-imperialist socialist ideology. We should also listen to what exporters of non-traditional goods have to say. The exporters want us to sign. They create the jobs. NGOs don't create jobs. They were against HIPIC, against devaluation, against a whole sort of stuff from the West. And it says that if they had their way, Ghana would be like Cuba. My point is, let's interrogate the matter critically. Thank you very much for all the messages that you have sent in. Now we move on to talk education at the Supreme Court. And what is education doing there at the Supreme Court? As you may be aware, just a minute, as you may be aware, the Progressive People's Party is in the Supreme Court. It's filed a writ seeking 4 declarations and 2 orders from the court. The first declaration they are seeking is that the Supreme Court should declare that upon the true and proper interpretation of Article 25(1) A of the 1992 Constitution and 38(2) of the same Constitution, and we are talking about the ones, the provisions that speak about free, universal, basic education, and the one that also gives a timeline of 10 years after Parliament's first, sits, as at the time that the Constitution was brought into being. So they are saying that if you look at these two, then the Supreme Court must come to the decision or the interpretation that governments that okay, let me just do this. It says that government has failed in discharging the said constitutional duty imposed on her by the people of Ghana. And what is the constitutional duty? Free, compulsory, universal, basic education. Government has failed. Number 2, declaration that the court should declare that that failure is an omission that ought not to be allowed. And so there is a duty, constitutional duty, to compel children of school-going age within the Republic, but who refuse or fail to do so, to be in school. Declaration number 3 that they are seeking, they want the court to to say that by the Education Act 2008, which was amended 2008, there's a provision that doesn't seem to make going to school at that age they are talking about compulsory, but makes it sort of not compulsory. So they say that law is inconsistent, or it derogates from the Constitution. And then the 4th declaration is that to the extent that that law is derogates from the Constitution, it should be declared null and void, and there should be it should be amended accordingly. So those are the declarations they are asking for, and the orders that they are asking are 2. They are asking for an order that government should take steps forthwith to compel children of school-going age to go to school. And then order number 2, that government should direct, the Supreme Court should direct government to take steps leading to an amendment of the Ghana Education Service Act, the Education Act, which makes going to school at that age imperative. It should make it imperative and mandatory and not permissive and empowering. So simply speaking, that particular law should say they shall, which is a must, be in school compulsorily, and not to say they may be in school compulsorily. I'll start this discussion with you, Mr. Ikotu. You have had the benefit of reading their rates. What do you say about it?
Well, thank you. As we all know, the case is pending before the Supreme Court. So perhaps we cannot do any detailed analysis.
Right.
Generally, I think it's triggered by the President's announcement during his sessional address.
Right.
That they're going to, NDC would also look at the free secondary education policy, and which was promised by the NPP in 2012. It came as a surprise to everybody because there were attacks from all sorts of individuals on the policy, saying that it was unattainable and that what we should be looking at is free compulsory basic education and not secondary education. In fact, that was an argument. Again, it was said that we didn't have schools, we didn't have money, that we didn't know how we were going to go about it. And I remember the run-up to the elections, there was this advert being run with the voice of Akumia saying he didn't know the cost. And then there will be another one by Professor Jambafo, who will give a certain figure. There's another one by Nana Akufo-Addo on the hard talk program, also saying some things. They try to ridicule it to the extent that in Accra, James Star was told that the people said they were not interested in any free secondary education. We should take our free secondary education away, and they can pay for their children's school fees and the rest. So clearly, it came as a huge surprise that within months, after the elections, we seem to be turning around and talking about the very thing that we had berated others about and over. Now, the PPP, obviously, in a reaction to what they have heard, is saying that, then why don't you also stick to free basic education? You haven't finished your free basic education. You now want to move on to, secondary education. So, to them, what I understand them to be saying is that, why don't you look at the constitutional provisions under Article 25 and 38, which talks about free compulsory basic education and the need for government within 2 years come out with a program and ensure that it is done before we start talking about
it is done within 10 years.
Within 10. I think that the NDC government during the first term Rawlings, we had so much of FQ, during their time. And I think they also even went further to deal with the non-formal program with Rojo, Metal Nunu all over the place. We heard him talking about it. Then there was there something about shepherd boys or school for shepherd boys in the north and things like that, But some of these things have indeed fizzled out. Well, as to whether they can get these declarations made in their favor is another matter altogether. My Electronic Education Act, which I have here, Section 2, still talks about free and compulsory basic education, unless there is an amendment I have not seen. But 2 deals with free and compulsory basic education. 1, a child who has attained school-going age shall, at the basic level, attend a course of instruction as laid down by the minister in the school recognized for that purpose by the minister. 2, education at the basic level is free and compulsory. 3, a district assembly shall, subject to subsection 3, provide the necessary infrastructural needs and any other facilities for the education of the population in the area of its authority. 4, where a child does not attend a course of instruction in compliance with subsection 1, the parent shall, in the first instance, appear before the Social Welfare Committee of the District Assembly for appropriate action. 5, a parent who fails to comply with the appropriate action agreed on with the Social Welfare Committee commits an offense and is liable on conviction by a district court.
Are you reading the Act 2008?
Yes, 2008, Section 2, subsections 1 to 5. And then for a first offense to be fined not exceeding 5 penalty units, B, for a continuing offense, B, to a fine of 1 penalty unit in respect of each day during which the offense continues, or in lieu of the payment of the fine to community service as determined by the court in consultation with the social welfare. And 6, where a parent cannot generally afford to educate the child, the district assembly may provide the support necessary for the education of the child. So unless there has been any amendment, I think that these provisions are clear enough that it is not the child but the parents who should be held responsible for failure to take the child to school, and the district assembly may come in when there is some difficulty. So I do not think that the Act itself appears to be in any conflict with the provisions of the Constitution. Of course, the argument of our brothers on the other side is that the language used is progressively free, and that what the MPP was proposing was like a one-time kind of free secondary education. Of course, our people were able to say that they knew where they were going to get the money. The
argument presently is that you're talking about FCUBE.
Yes.
Not senior secondary education.
Exactly.
Which the Constitution says shall be progressively free.
Yes.
But this is basic.
Yes, I am saying that our friends are saying that in the secondary school category, it is not going to be a one-touch affair, but it is going to be progressively free. So they are not saying that what they are going to introduce will be one time. It shall be progressively free. But the point I'm making is that having berated, having said all sorts of things about what the MPP, proposed in the run-up of the elections, it creates difficulties for people who are listening to them. And they now telling us that, by the Constitution says progressively, so we are going to do it. What the PPP says is that, why don't you, if that is your position, stick to the FCUBE and make sure that the FCUBE becomes free until such time that we are very satisfied that we've gotten through the basic one before you also move on, even if it is progressively free.
Okay. let me come in. Let me bring in Malva. Their contention is simply this, that you ought, government, not as in the NDC, ought to have completed or achieved the universal basic education by 2005, according to the strict dictates of the Constitution. That has not been achieved. And the Constitution is very clear about that. So why don't you finish that before you move the next step?
The second part of your question is where I have a difficulty. Because if people are going to court based on legalities, then their arguments should also be based on legalities. Where in the Constitution does it say that until you finish the primary level, you can't introduce same at the secondary level? So it doesn't fly to me.
The injunction for 10-year completion of the primary level comes before the senior secondary one.
I agree, but it doesn't say that you cannot introduce, even within the 10 years, the SSS. So I'm saying that those who argue legally should stay on the legal platform and not shift the argument as and when it faces them. Now, the NDC, in this manifesto that I'm holding, has never kicked against free SHS. Contrary to what my senior has said, indeed, it is provided in this Constitution that the NDC is, as it were, all out for the senior high school to be made progressively free. So this must be told, and nobody is confused, and nobody should be confused, that under our manifesto, page 17, it is provided for. But you see, this suit, everything is suable, if you ask my senior. But as to whether you get your reliefs is what I think that is left to the court. you look at the constitutional provisions, 25(1) says that there shall be free, compulsory, universal basic education. Good. Then you go to 38, which is under the directive principle of state policy.
Right.
Saying that this must be achieved within 10 years, after 2 years of parliament sitting. Now, one would agree that, and you see, this suit is against the state.
Right.
And not the government. The government is just an agent of the state. So one would agree that, strictly speaking, Article 38 has been violated because we did not provide free compulsory basic education within the 10 years. So the Supreme Court can make that declaration. But to what effect? Because, and I also agree that our government should have come out to explain to us why they could not achieve Article 38. But I also think that the reason why they kept silent was that they think that directive principles of state policy are not justiciable, so they can allow it go. But
sorry, but once again, when you say straightforward that directives, principles of state policy are not justiciable, I think to say so may not be exactly correct.
You see, if you take them alone, they are guides. If you leave them alone, as the Constitution indicated, they are guides which will guide all of us to achieve a certain end. But when you are able to tie them to the enjoyment of a certain right in the Constitution, which because Article 38 was not adhered to, it deprived you from enjoying a certain right, then that one, you are on proper grounds.
Okay.
Now, you look at this particular matter, and then you come to the realization that our Supreme Court has made some pronouncement, although not entirely on Article 25, and that is the principle of availability of resources. Now, this principle would run through, in my view, Article 25. Because, you see, education is a social right. And it is one of the rights whose fulfillment is subject to the availability of resources and the capacity of the state to provide same. So, one would want to find out, suppose we go to the Supreme Court and the declaration is made, and I'm sure the Minister of Finance would appear at the court and show statistics, just as the universities did in that case, where they show statistics that, yes, we are aware of this provision, but we are unable because there are no resources. So if the Supreme Court makes that declaration and we are faced with the stark reality of lack of resources, to what end would that declaration be?
The argument is that you cannot say so when you have made it clear that you have money to do the other part, which is the upper one. So finish the lower, portion before. And they say when you talk about that one also being linked to the capacity of the state to provide, it is not exactly so, because by their reading of the Constitution, Article 25(1)(a) says basic education shall be free, compulsory, and available to all. It ends there. Then you come to where it talks about capacity. It's in respect, that's what they say, it's in respect of the secondary education.
And I'm saying that simple logic. The Constitution says that it shall be made free. You don't make it free in a vacuum. It is based on the availability of resources. I don't think that they are asking the president to go back to Bole Bamboy and gather his family's property, sell them, and come and finance it. That's not what they are saying.
They are saying for that specific one, it said it shall be made free.
With what?
You have 2 months to bring a program. The program was brought. Then after that, you have 10 years to implement that program. And it didn't find it necessary, that's their interpretation, to say that that ought to be done subject to capacity or availability of resources. So if the framers of the Constitution didn't do that, don't add that, because the framers of the Constitution were clear in their minds what they wanted to do when they only said subject to availability of resources when it came only to the question of senior secondary education.
You see, this Constitution you are quoting is not only a legal document.
Right.
It is a political document and an economic document. The judges have an inherent power to interpret this constitution in such a way as not to affect the political stability, economic stability of this country.
Right.
The document that you are quoting copiously, and my senior Ikotu will tell you, when being interpreted by the Supreme Court, will look at the impact of their ruling on our economic affairs.
Right.
So, although the Constitution did not say that you can only provide the free education basic level when funds are available, the Supreme Court has the inherent jurisdiction to give it an interpretation that will not affect the economic well-being of this country and the political well-being of this country.
All right. Kuku, what do you say to the suit as it is presently couched?
Well, quite interesting. And I think there's a certain element of consistency relative to the PPP's position on this matter.
Right.
If you go back to the campaign period, and I have a document they issued out where they said to the PPP, free compulsory education is a high priority that requires the shifting of other goals and objectives to ensure the continuing ability of government to fund expenditure in this area. And they proceeded to ask for public debate, productive, constructive engagement as to how to fund that process. So they are being consistent. What they've done now, they've shifted away from the public debating into the court of law to try and seek, some reliefs and compel the state to do otherwise. You see, back again, you remember not too long ago on this very program, when we were discussing the president's announcement of the intention to launch the free SHS, I made a point about why didn't they tell us what had happened below? Because earlier in the campaign, they had made the point that even the basic level is not entirely free. And that we ought to finish with that exercise before proceeding upstairs. And my brother was here and he said, oh, that was not a big deal. But today he is hinting that somehow they should have told, governments, he did it generally, should have told us what efforts have been made down below. It comes back to the point that he was disagreeing with us on. But you see, yes, it's the same thing. I'm not mixing anything. I'm very clear in my mind what I'm saying. Now, the point is this. He's talked about manifesto. It's true. It's out there. But you see, the story about Ghana itself is what worries me. Look at this graphic publication. Daily Graphic, 30th November, 1995. Headline, Free Basic Education for All. House, and that's Parliament, approves plan. I don't know where the plan is, but Parliament apparently approved a plan. $350 million needed within 10 years for implementation. If you look at the date, Parliament was doing exactly what the Constitution had asked that it should be done. That's government and Parliament. We're doing exactly that because it was 2 years after, and they came to the House with this plan, put in place a budgeted figure, an estimated figure of 350. And you listen to what was said. This story is by C.S. Wabi. Parliament yesterday endorsed the government's program to provide, yesterday meaning November 29th, 1995. It's almost 19 years ago. To provide free compulsory universal basic education within the next 10 years. An estimated 350.1 million is to be spent on the program within the 10-year period. Winding up for the debate on the program, Mr. Harry Sawyer, Education Minister, told the House that the government will remain a major source of financing the program in collaboration with donor agencies. The provision of free compulsory universal basic education is a constitutional requirement.
Right.
The minister underlined the government's commitment to the success of the program because it considers basic education as, quote, the fundamental building blocks of the country. Consequently, no effort will be spared to ensure that free quality basic education is given to all children of school-going age from basic 1 through 9 within the period. This is 1995. Come 1996, December 16th, Daily Graphic again, big headline, free education, fee-free education won't be derailed. President Rawlings assures. Just a letter from there. Government will spare no, this is from Joe Ochre. Government will spare no efforts in ensuring that the fee-free compulsory basic education program is not jeopardized when implemented. To this end, government is empowering the district assemblies through the Common Fund to assume a greater responsibility towards the provision of facilities for basic education for children. The president said there is the need to ensure that buildings, school furniture, books, materials, and equipment, and all the necessary logistics are available for every child, no matter where he or she may live, to have access to free basic education. This is 18 years ago. Now, where is that plan? And what happened to that plan? Who came up with the figure of $350 million within 10 years? Did we make any practical efforts to mobilize that money, that amount, targeted at this program or plan that was put in place and approved by Parliament? You see, it's been like, it's an ad hoc approach. We like talking too much. We're a nation of talkers, not doers. We put out a plan in an august House of Parliament. It's approved. Figures are put out there. Newspapers put it out there. The sector ministry and the other institutions, district assembly and all the rest. Let's do an audit, performance audit, as to whether indeed the plan was followed to the letter. I'm aware that as time went on, capitation grants and all those things came in. I'm aware. But that's the point I'm making, that it doesn't appear to have been a concerted, systematic, implementation of a plan that was approved by the House of Parliament. And that's where we are back here.
See,
making the same argument. I'm sure in the next 10 years, somebody can replay this very program and you will see another set of panelists discussing the same problem. That's what happens to Ghana. A certain inertia, informs the way we go about our development. And that's why we are here. I am not sure about the court forum, how things will go. And as we were questioned, since the matter is ongoing, one has to be careful the kind of judgmental comments we'll make. But I like it, the spirit of it.
Right.
I appreciate the spirit of it, that a political party has decided that instead of debating the issue, which is also important, they will proceed to an appropriate forum and seek judicial determination. Whatever the outcome, I believe this country will benefit based on the issues that will be interrogated.
Your views and comments are still welcome. 1422, that's the text line. You can post your comments also on our Facebook wall or send them directly to newsfile@myjoyonline.com. Mr. Pelpo, on the 11th of January 2010, the President, John Atta Mills, inaugurated the Constitution Review Commission, and they went ahead to do their job. I remember we voted as much as about 2.7 million, and sometime later some additional monies had to be advanced to them as well, and they were supposed to review the Constitution to bring it up to date. With contemporary developments. We had over 83,000 submissions that were made. They held the health fora and submitted a report eventually, I think on the 20th of December 2011. And that 1,000-page document, I think we all know, should represent the biggest socio-political database ever in the history of this country. When they listened to everybody, they made proposals. In all their proposals, you find that they make lengthy recommendations. But when it came to this issue, the recommendations were short and simple. 2, this is what he said. That The Commission recommends that free compulsory universal basic education be fully enforced, that's the emphasis, be fully enforced by the Ministry of Education with emphasis on quality education. And finally, the Commission recommends that the right to education be explicitly guaranteed in the Constitution. What's happening? Government accepted this. What's happening? Must it take the PPP to go to court and compel government to ensure that if you're a child of school-going age, you should not be seen loitering on the streets of Accra?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me establish the fact that government is a going concern and that it's not just the NDC governments, but all governments, right after the Constitution was promulgated and the first constitutional government was put in place, the questions were raised by them and attempts were made to solve the problems. Let me first of all congratulate the PPP for being progressive and constructive in opposition, offering a solid reason why they are opposing us and asking the Supreme Court to give an interpretation of what is in the Constitution. I believe that they are not doing it because the NDC has made a pronouncement. I believe that they are doing it because they think it's their responsibility and we shouldn't belittle or water it down.
Right.
And that the recommendations made by the Constitutional Review Committee is because of the emphasis already made by the Constitution itself. If you look at Article 38 of the Constitution, the directive principle of state policy is giving direction as to how this whole idea should be manifest in our governance endeavors. The law is there. The compulsion of it is there. Must. And, shall. And you see it very specific in Article 25, that basic education shall be free, compulsory, and available to all. There's no ambiguity to it. If you go to the directive principle, it's shown how it should happen. And he talked about secondary education, which, of course, my brother Amalma has shown that is already in our manifesto. It's not as if we just imported it, and that we should progressively introduce it in the secondary, at the secondary level. So what they have recommended has come to government. Government has accepted it. It's now going to be subjected to the people of Ghana through a referendum for everybody to agree that aspects of the Constitution must be tempered with. But we are conscious of the fact that we have a responsibility to satisfy the requirements of the Constitution, despite the need for amendments and despite the exhortation by the committee for us to take basic secondary
What the committee
education.
did is just a reminder, just to remind you that you have an obligation. Which
That's
you
why
have
I'm
not
saying
fulfilled.
exhortation.
So
it's an
take care of
advice.
it.
It's like they are entreating us to do so. And government is definitely going to do it. And we are doing it. That's why we think that access, which is an emphasis in the Constitution, is very important. Make sure it is available. That's why school and the trees will have to be eradicated from the system. If we look at the traction in our efforts to provide schools for every nooks and cranny of this country, thousands of schools have been built. At the basic level, efforts have been made to make education accessible to all children before you can enforce the law. Because if the classroom is not there, people go to, children go to school, sit under trees. The rains are subject to the vagaries of the weather. There are no teachers, there are no books, no facilities, and you are compelling them to go. You will not be fair to them. You will have to create a certain equilibrium that allows you to have the structures available to all of them. Then you can enforce the law.
The PPP, do you see that they have a point? They say
yes,
that finish with that aspect before you take the next step. It should be a gradual gradation, so to speak. And at page 696 696 of the Constitution Review Commission, this is what they observed. They said that the Commission observes that the committee of experts that developed proposals for the 1992 Constitution proposed that children should not be allowed to leave school until they have completed their basic education or have attained the age of 18 years.
Yeah, the definition of a child, they are taking the basic definition of a child, that if you are under 18, you are still a child. And so if the Constitution is talking about basic education, it shows that within that space of time, you may still be in school.
So does PPP have a point by saying that finish that before you move on to the next level?
It's an opinion, and which opinion they are importing into the law. And it's not left to the Supreme Court to interpret it.
They say the law says that you should have finished that by 2005.
Yes, the state's machinery should have ensured that it happened. And if it hasn't happened, it's logical for anybody to take the state's machinery to court and to insist that the court should enforce it, or rather interpret it, and then we will enforce and make sure that it works. So I think that the PPP has a logical position, and we can't fault them for doing that. We can only try to match up to our responsibility. But also take note that we are talking about resources here, and if there is something that we can do to bypass, to sidestep the need for resources, we would do it, definitely, to satisfy the Constitution. Which government doesn't want to be seen to be doing the best, or to be satisfying all the requirements of the Constitution, making the people smile and happy? We all want to do that. The difference is the scarcity of resources, the capacity of the government using state resources it mobilizes to be able to implement the law to the letter. So I think that all this will be taken into consideration, as Abraham said, for decisions to be made, so that we can all be happy that there is a decision, and interpreting the law we want the way it should be, and insisting on governments to follow it and to ensure that the children of Ghana get the best out of the states.
The question is, if you are admitting that the law exists and the law enjoins that this is what ought to be done, and I'm going to get Honorable Iko to go back to that law, section 2.6, which they are referring to. Must you wait for a group, the PPP, to go to court and seek to compel the provision?
You see, we are talking about the headlines here. We are not going into the details. What is it that they are seeking? What is the proof that we haven't been doing what we are doing, that governments over the years are not doing what we are doing? What is their proof that the present NDC government hasn't done enough to enforce the law as it should be? What is it that they have on their hands? We need to see the full arguments before us, before we can say that they are either right or wrong.
Their proof can be found in the Constitution Review Commission.
It's not enough.
It can be found there.
Yeah, but it's not enough. They are now making a case out of it. They now want to bring fresh arguments. They should bring those fresh arguments.
We paid over $2 million to a group to do this job. They went around the country and they came out with a report, and it tells us that what the PPP is saying is in sync with what the situation is.
No. It's the other way around. The PPP should be making reference to it. Is that what they have referred to?
They have not.
Yeah, but now I'm saying that what they have referred to, let them bring it to the table. Let us all see that the NDC has done ABCD. It hasn't satisfied the requirements of committing ourselves to basic education, or the previous government did not satisfy that requirement.
Right.
Let us see the argument. I've earlier on said that I like their approach, and I also say that they are constructive, they are progressive, they are showing that opposition can be profitable, and I like it that way. But I'm saying also that it's not sufficient for them to say they are taking us to court.
Okay.
There should be logical, constructive arguments that should convince people that we should have been doing what we are doing now. For us, we think that we have done so much. We have invested so much in resources. Get Fund is in huge areas. I mean, they are in huge debts because of the heavy investment in basic education. We are doing more. And the last time the president made mention of the secondary education, my big brother here was making reference to the president's announcement, giving the impression that we didn't support something they supported and we are taking the U-turn. That's wrong. The president said, in accordance with the Constitution, he has received a report, a paper from the Ministry of Education suggesting how we can progressively introduce free secondary education.
You don't want us to get back to that debate.
But see, when he said that, it is only logical for us to say so. We say it has to be progressive in accordance with the Constitution. And we are saying, he said that he received some report from the Education Ministry presenting to us how we can do it progressively. And then MPP and everybody is all in arms and saying we are copying them, we are reneging on our earlier position, and etc., etc. That is a wrong interpretation of what we stand for.
I'm saying you don't want us to get back to that argument. You don't want us to get back to that.
Yes. Article 25. You don't want us to sit here and say that there will be a government that will not want to implement Article 25. You don't know the amount of vote that will rake in. So there's no deliberate attempt to sidestep Article 25. It is because governments have been overstretched. Look, these 10 years you are talking about.
But the politicians are also aware. The politicians are also aware. The politicians are also aware that the promise or the campaign on free SHS is a big one. And so if you have it going into the 2016 elections, you've got what I say,
the 10-year period you are talking about in the Constitution fell under the MPP. Now, because, in my view, there were no resources, they introduced this capitation grant. They had a capitation grant, yes.
Right.
Now, that also brought in number of the school enrollment increased.
Right.
So, it then had an effect.
It created new challenges.
New challenges. It had an effect at the secondary level. So now, you see, when you ask the education policymakers, they will tell you that we need to straighten the up because more children are in the lower level and need to go up.
Thank you.
There's a moment. Yeah. I mean, just a small point. The 10-year period did not fall exclusively within the period of the MPP. it cuts across.
That's right.
No, what do you mean?
Yes.
2002.
Yeah. From when?
Years.
From 1995 to
97.
Yes.
Before.
Yes. So I'm saying that it's not peculiar. It's not an exclusive preserve of one party that ruled the country, and that's not the way I was looking at it. I was just saying that we launched a plan at the appropriate time, in line with the Constitution, and as a nation, I doubt if we really went about systematic implementation of the plan.
Okay.
It doesn't matter which party came in or went out.
All right. Mr. Aikwetu, when you read the enabling legislation, so to speak, do you find any, like the lawyers would say, lacuna? Is there anything that does not make for the compulsion aspects? Because that appears to be a very big part of their rates. That there is the need for the compulsion. Where is the compulsion?
Well, I think it's all captured under Section 2, which has the broad title.
They are saying Section 2.6 ought to be amended.
Section 2.6, where a parent cannot genuinely afford to educate the child, the District Assembly may provide the support necessary for the education of the child.
May.
Yes.
And they say that may ought to read shall.
Well, we're trying to be purposive. It's already compulsory, and the parent is being held responsible if, it fails to ensure that the child goes to school. But you see, we have now come to the realization that you cannot punish somebody for inability to pay, even it's just debts. So under the High Court rules, sending somebody to prison for failing to pay, is just had now been taken out as being a rather degrading and dehumanizing treatment. I think that is why that might have informed them to say that you cannot send the parent to prison if the parent cannot genuinely afford. Then the District Assembly should be able.
Doesn't exactly say so, because before 2.6, there appears to be a clear offense if you don't send your child to school. And there appears to be some punishment for it. And this was done just in 2008.
In lieu of payment of fine, you can be sentenced to community service as defined by the court in consultation with social welfare.
So as we speak, the compulsive aspect is in operation. But we are not enforcing it.
Oh, well, we don't know what the law enforcement agencies are doing. But I agree with you. If so many people are walking on the streets, not going to school, selling all sorts of things, it's evidence.
And the law says catch their parents and punish them.
Yes. In fact, I think it's been during the First Republic. It's been part of our educational act, but in those days, I think there was more of some respect for law because of other things that might have happened, PDAs and the rest, that people were a little bit more conscious about. So, but let me put this thing also in perspective. It is not like people have not been talking or governments have not been talking about education. It is not like that. We've had various changes. We've had educational policies, the abolition of middle school, replacement with JSS turning to junior high schools and the rest. A lot of work had been done
4 years and 3 years and back.
Again, I see a difficulty, which I think the PPP, I agree with PPP. It's a quick reaction because I think, again, I would disagree with my colleague on my left because he said the president just referred to the Constitution and we are saying that they are trying to literally steal ideas. Didn't the president give a time lapse, a period within which they were going to start it? He gave a period, 20 what? In his speech, he mentioned the time.
2016.
2016. So why having mentioned the time period? It means that you intend to implement it. So that is why they are calling upon you to ensure that you go back to basics. But my argument is this. Don't we go to school since pre-independence and independence period? Haven't we been going to school? What happens after the basic education? Don't we move on to secondary? What happens after secondary? Don't we move on to tertiary?
Right.
So are we going to sit there and say that we're only going to deal with the compulsory aspect of the primary without necessarily moving forward when we want to improve, to develop? And therefore, coming from where I come from, generally we were saying that there's the need to also look at making the secondary education free as quickly as possible to ensure that more people get access to education. I mean, all of us, I believe, in our positions might have met parents who are going about asking for monies to go and pay school fees. You are an MP, and I know how difficult these things are for some of you. So we cannot say that it is that easy that people just pay secondary fee. They are unable to pay. And therefore, if there is a way of looking at it, why not? That is an integrated approach. In other words, we do the primary at the same time doing the secondary. But I think that the propaganda that was, applied to the MPP's one is what is creating all these difficulties. Otherwise, if people cannot pay school fees and government says, I want to make it free, why should people even go to court to ensure that do not do it? These are sort of things. You bring about a Northern Development Program. Then it is rubbish. Next time it comes in a different name called SADA. If you continue doing these things, it gives worry to people that, look, why is it that you are only bent on winning elections and that you do whatever you can within that period to win the election? Immediately you finish, the good ideas that you said were very bad and could never be implemented, you turn around to implement them. This is why people are angry with this sort of
Is it also true that the MPP stole the national health insurance from Dr. Edward?
You see,
Is it also true?
you see,
that's the charge.
There is some kind of misunderstanding of what governance is all about. And I stated from the very beginning that it's a going concern.
Right.
If you introduce something and it's good, it is compelling for the good of the people of Ghana for another person to continue. It shouldn't be an exclusive rights to anybody.
Good.
And thankfully, this thing is in the Constitution. If the president makes a mention of it, why should the MPP be so angry and so suspicious? And
when you have rubbished it at the time,
yeah, we rubbish it because you are introducing something you don't understand.
You and us.
How could you say you are introducing free education, secondary level, and you said you were providing 78 million cedis as a result to introduce it? Nobody understood what it was all about. It was just out of the blue. It's a fluke. That they just, let me see whether I can, if I mention this, it will catch crowd. And then he mentioned it. And we said, no, that's not what, that's not what happens. They mentioned it, they asked him, how much does it cost? 78 million. Look at that.
No, it's not
for which
it's 78 million.
But it's not true. It's a distortion.
It is just a distortion.
I said earlier that you don't want us to get into that debate anymore. Thank you very much. This is Newsfile, your most authoritative news analysis show. Your views and comments and questions are welcome. 1422, that's the text line. And you can also post your comments on our Facebook wall. This show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of Lipton Tea, inspiration flowing from nature. Errata Motors, where you get the best vehicles for the cheapest prices. And Star Assurance is your CIMG insurance company of 2012, and that's your solid partner. Okay, we'll be right back, and we'll move on to go to The Hague to ask questions about Vulcan Energy. $12 million that is being sought from Ghana, been awarded that entity. The question I'm asking is, how is poor Ghana going to pay that money? And is this not to spite our Supreme Court and the sovereignty of Ghana, or it's a fair deal? Because the Supreme Court said the PPP that led to that particular arrangement was null and void and of no effect, and that the country didn't owe anybody anything at the time. The arbitral tribunal has decided otherwise and says you ought to pay.